thank you so much for all being here. And now, I know Ayad does not need an introduction, but I'm still going to try my best. We all know he's a novelist and a playwright, and we also know that he's got many, many accolades in literature and drama in the last decade. There's a little tidbit of information that I kind of gathered from all what I was reading about him, that he is an obsessive autodidact. Now, do I know the meaning of that? Of course I didn't. So I learned. He puzzled his parents by learning the entire Quran, studying the Quran, and then he's a self-taught linguist too. He learned French, and then he translated and directed plays of French playwrights like Annette. His first novel was American Dervish, and it was published in the same month when his play Disgraced opened. This play is about, I haven't seen the play, but I was reading about it. It's about mixed feelings of a lawyer of Pakistani Muslim heritage. And that's when I was saying the tickets were selling at $1,500 each. The New York Times wrote about his play as a vitally engaging play about thorny questions of identity, religion, and an accent on the incendiary topic of how radical Islam and terrorism it inspires have affected the public discourse. Of course, he won the Pulitzer Prize for that drama. His plays Junk and Invisible Hand dealt with finance and bond kings, and I'll tell you later why he revolves around finance. And they were up for Tony nominations. Homeland Elegies, which possibly made us invite Ayad here, was my absolute, I could not put it down, amazing book, and it was compared to The Great Gatsby. He has been awarded the Edith Citation of Merit. He's presently the president of PEN, and that organization actually aims to protect free expressions in the US and in the world. But a little bit about Ayad, which I talked about him being an obsessive autodidact. I believe he has premonitions, and he had one just before COVID, and COVID hit us. And
I didn't bring my tarot cards. I will not be doing any readings.
I know. And he reads a sonnet of Shakespeare every morning. And then his parents told him, when he was in his 20s, that if he reads the Wall Street Journal every day, they'll give him $10,000 to invest for him. And that's enough about Ayad, except I'll say one last bit about him, that he looks for God within. And now the most difficult job, and that is my friend Anu. And when I was talking to Anu as to how should I introduce you, she says, you know, I suffer from multiple personality disorder. And which she does actually. But she's an earthling at the same time, so I do not know how those two things work. Yeah, she was a professor of economics, and she taught at UC Santa Cruz, Santa Clara Business School. She taught development economics and mathematical economics. And by the way, that means nothing to me because I left economics in high school. She actually, the funniest thing is she calls herself a sassy person also. You know, she was a special advisor to UC Santa Cruz, and it was an international initiative, and so it was called, I forget the total acronym, but she was sassy, which is Special Advisor to UCSC Chancellor on International Initiative. Now I remember.
SACII, so
yes,
pronounced sassy.
thank you, Anu. And she was also the president of UCSC Foundation Board. And now in her retirement, oh goodness me, now I have to read a longer list. She serves on the boards of lots of non-profits, many of them. She's on UC Santa Cruz Foundation Board, she's on the board of India Community Center, the Pratichi Trust, which has been established by her professor and teacher, the Nobel laureate Amartya Sen. helpage. And then she absorbed a lot of Bengali from her first husband, and she's Bengali Diaspora Pravasi. She's on the board of that too. And of course, one of the most precious things that she does is to steer the Ayad Maitra lecture at UCSC on humanism, reason, and tolerance, and that's why she is introducing Ayad. She also gives expression to her concerns about social justice, economic equity, diversity, and inclusiveness. And actually, if I keep adding all the adjectives, Anu really is an amazing woman. And though she said that the last thing she said, she needs to swallow a Prozac, become whole, and subsume it all within a concern for helping save the planet. And we are all going to help her save the planet. And now I hand it over to Anu and Ayad.
Thank you, Kiran. And thank you all for coming today. I did decide that to be true to myself, I need to have this discussion not as a critic, but as an admiring lay reader. And so, the professional critic I am not, but a lay reader, an admiring one I am. So I shan't use words like mediate and interrogate and intermediate, except to talk about something that happens between two people. But so this is you're getting my remarks and my reactions as a reader. I did discuss it with my book club, many of whom are here today, and thank you for coming. But that's the level of the discussion that we're going to have. Just fair warning. Since
Duly warned, I'm looking forward to it. So.
But I do love food. So here today, I do love food. So here today, I've structured this whole conversation as a meal with appetizer, mains, and dessert. Very much like your elegies, that is a symphony with the overture, the main, and the coda. So the first set of questions will be the appetizer, which will be that I will be addressing them to you, Mr. Akhtar, the writer. The second set of questions, which are the mains, I wish to respect your decision to blend memoir, novel, socio-political commentary into something the critics have dubbed, but which word I don't like at all, but they've called it auto-fiction. So what I'd like to do is to level the playing field a little bit. These questions will be posed to Ayad, the narrator of Elegies, the character you have created, the character who lives inside you, who you know so well, and who is so much you. So like Pesu, one of your favorite poets, you seem to be saying, "For I lack the divine simplicity of being only my outer self." This way, I have the freedom to ask questions of you that I would be reluctant to ask of you, the person. But you, please feel free to roll with it as you please, answer it in whichever voice you want is your. As for dessert, I am a hog, but I think you will get something delicious too. You have your Mary Maroney. You begin and end with her, and I have my Vikram Seth. I'd like to start by reciting Vikram's exquisitely comforting elegy, for you really, but in honor of your parents, Masood and Khurshid. All you who sleep tonight, far from the ones you love, no hand to left or right, and emptiness above. Know that you aren't alone. The whole world shares your tears, some for 2 nights or one, and some for all their years. So, tell us about your parents, Masood and Khurshid Ayad. Mr. Akhtar, you are a very successful writer for many reasons, but for me, it's also your language. Your writing is solid, polished, no stylistics or gimmicks, just that I had to, much too often, interrupt my reading to look up words in the dictionary. It was annoying, but I was more annoyed with myself. Why the heck did I not know a word like descry or descry? And tohu, bohu, what a delicious word. If I'd heard it before, I would have thought, that's Bengali or Bihari. It means your daughter-in-law. Tohu, bohu. I would never imagine that's an English word, a bona fide English word. So, how did your parents, not only by living their lives, which is very obvious from your writing, nurture and shape your talent for writing? And a prerequisite for a good writer is that she or he has to be deeply engaged with the word and the world. And your mother, Khurshid, seemed to be a bit sophisticated in her choice of books. Did she read them aloud to you? Your father loved being with people and was pretty driven. Did he make you also memorize the dictionary?
I think that was the longest introduction.
My apologies.
No, it's not that. I think it's important. Look, this is a big crowd, and it can be nerve-wracking. It's nerve-wracking for me too. I think the more we can just have a conversation and not worry about what the preparation was. You clearly have done a lot of work.
Yes, I worked very hard.
That's wonderful. Let's just have a conversation.
Okay.
So, many in the room will be familiar with the trajectory of my parents. They came in the late 60s after the quotas changed in 65, and they came over on a program that the State Department had, which brought them, because they were both top of their class at King Edward's Medical College, they got into this program that gave them visas, plane tickets, jobs, and apartments. And so their experience of coming to America was, completely different. They sort of roll out the red carpet and come here. Kennedy had wanted to put people on the moon. He wanted to win the battle of technology with the Russians, and so bringing the best and brightest from across the planet to America, which in the case of my parents meant folks from the subcontinent, because as I'm sure you all know, before 65, you could only have 400 people a year come from the subcontinent, the entire subcontinent. So they came here, and I was the firstborn, and you can imagine they were both, my dad was the only son in his family, and my mom was the eldest in her family, and I was the first child born outside. Well, I was the first child born in that generation, and then also outside of, Pakistan. So there was a lot of pressure on my parents that, I should turn out okay. And so my mom, when I was 4, she trained me to say that when somebody asks you at school what you want to be when you grow up, you tell them you want to be a neurologist. I didn't know what a neurologist was, but I said it. Teachers were very impressed. I had a high school teacher who changed my life. And it wasn't really until I was 15 that I sort of realized I wanted to be a writer. So, just to sort of cut to the chase and sort of get to the question, get to the answer about how my parents responded to my choice to become a writer and whether or not they supported it, I think they were perplexed. I think my father was a free thinker, and he loved having left Pakistan because he felt that he never liked to be part of groups, and even in America, he didn't really want to hang out with, Pakistani doctors just because they were Pakistani. He had Pakistani doctor friends, but he just was he wasn't really a loner because he wasn't outgoing, but he was somebody who was very, ruggedly individualist. So I had that as an example, and my dad said, look, you can do whatever you want. If you fail and you end up as a bum, it's your problem. So I thought, okay, I'll work really hard, and, I was the eldest born son, immigrant kid, and so I worked hard, but it took a long time. And my parents were very worried about me for a long time. But at a certain point, I think as Kafka once said, the objective is to get to the point of no return as quickly as possible. And I got to that point, some point in my 30s, and there was no alternative. I didn't have a resume that I couldn't go anywhere and get a job. I was doing odd jobs to sort of make ends meet, but I got lucky. I kept working. I'd been writing since I was 15, but it wasn't until I was 39 that American Dervish was published. So that's 24 years. 24 years of really, just at it every day, constantly. And then, what's happened since then, since 2010 and now, it's just miraculous to me. I can't even believe it a lot of the time. I can't remember what year it was, sometime in the aughts, that I was watching the Oscars and Kim Basinger had gotten up after winning the Oscar, and she gets up there and she says, if it can happen to a girl from Georgia, it can happen to anyone. And I remember watching that and saying, Jesus, you're Kim Basinger. Not a girl from Georgia. But then, you know, from the kind of indigence that I had experienced, and sort of, I was married, and my marriage fell apart because I continued to try to do this thing. I was virtually insolvent. It's in my late 30s. My parents were getting an earful. I mean, when my grandmother died, I loved her. We all loved her. But my dad said, look, I gotta say, I'm kind of relieved because you have no idea the grief that your mother gets because of you from your mother. You know, I was 27 years old. We went back to Pakistan. You know, it's the first time after college, and 26 years old. And you know, the first thing we got off the plane was a 3 a.m. flight that gets into Islamabad, and we would get into the kitchen, and the whole family's gathered, and pratas and everything. So eat a whole meal at 3 a.m. But in the middle of the meal, my grandfather, who was a military fellow most of his life, pulls me into the sitting room, closes the door, sits down. What happened to you? You were such an intelligent child. Now you're singing and dancing on the stage. What's wrong with you? I want to try to explain to him, I'm not singing and dancing. I'm doing theater. I just did theater. Bullshit. From their perspective, they didn't understand, and they'd come to America. They'd send their children were now going to America to make better lives. What is this nonsense? Eldest child, how much money did you spend on his college? And what is he doing now? So you can understand, and so I think there was a lot of confusion for them until something started to happen in my life. And, it wasn't really until 2013, so, and then I had this really miraculous thing that happened. I was so unsuccessful for so long. And then all of a sudden I had this book published, and I had a play that went up in Chicago, then it ended up in New York, and then I won the Pulitzer. And so it was like 180 degrees in like 3 years, which was insane. And then I often joke at events like this. I was like, well, if it could happen to a girl from Georgia. But it wasn't until then, I was 42, that I got that call from my dad. Ayad, you don't understand. I didn't know what is this Pulitzer. But the nurses and techs, everybody is coming to me, the doctors. Do you know what your son did? You won Pulitzer Prize. Ayad, I am very, very proud of you. Now when they think of Milwaukee, they will not think M. Akhtar, they will think A. Akhtar. Which was a beautiful thing, because all throughout our childhoods, my brother and I, something that my father used to say to us was, the objective is for you both to achieve a higher level of being than we did. So it was not about success in a financial way, but there was something about this approbation or acceptance from the culture that whatever my success represented for him, that also in a way represented a different level of being as he saw it. I don't know that that's how I would see it, but he did. So, look, I'm very grateful. I had great parents. They're both passed now. I had conflictual relationships with both of them for various different reasons, as one can tell from the book that I wrote. Of course, so much of the portrait of the parents is drawn from my own parents.
That's a great way for me to ask the next question, which is talking about your life, and it seems like a pretty interesting, and by the way, apparently a lot of people have been talking to me about your narration of Elegies, and they love it because you can put on these different voices so authentically. Yeah. But and I've heard you talking about the importance of authenticity, and about telling it as you see it and experience it. And yet, at the same time, you're playing with us, I think. You've written a book that is clearly a social commentary, political discourse, admittedly a memoir, but the subtitle reads, a novel. why not have just written a memoir? And you know that the memoir, Annie Ernaux, you know that memoir seems to be the genre of our age. So why not just a memoir? Or why not just a work of fiction? What was this hybrid thing that you felt compelled to create? So tell us about that.
I worried that the audience, I have two answers to that. The first is that increasingly folks seem to be reading fiction as if it were nonfiction. That is to say, somebody writes a book and it's about somebody from Africa, and if that person is not African, then obviously it can't be authentic. So the novel seems to be referring to the biography of the author, even if it's fiction, and that what legitimizes the act of authorship is that the author shares all of the necessary identities that the fiction presents. So that's happened to the culture at large. So I thought, let's dispense with this nonsense. Everyone's going to read the book and wonder, well, what's true anyway, right? Because he wrote it. So, when I did Fresh Air for this book, Dave Davies spent the entire time asking me, didn't ask about the book, he asked me what was real in the book and about my life. So that's what's happened. So let's get that out of the way. Let's just give the narrator my name, many of the facts of my life. And then let's go for a crazy ride and see how far we can go. So that was one aspect of it. I think the other aspect of it was that I'm a dramatist. I'm not a memoirist. The story of memoir, however powerful, is limited in its dramatic scope because it has to hew to what actually happened. I gotta make stuff up to make it interesting. That's just the kind of artist that I am. So when I started writing this book, almost by page 3, page 4, I was already changing the facts of what had happened. I was making things stronger, sharper. I was making reversals sharper. The father represents this sort of unapologetic embrace and celebration of financial and American individualism. And the mother represents this very, very dyspeptic, anti-colonial, homesick response to the New World. That is mostly true, but I pushed them further into each side to create more possibility for conflict. And that's the kind of thing that I do all the time as a dramatist, because that's how my mind thinks. So I couldn't call it a memoir. I did the legal review with Little Brown, and she was terrified that the whole thing was going to have to get rewritten in various ways because people were going to be upset or there was going to be legal liabilities. And we took 3 days to get through, which is a really long time for something like that. And at the end, she was really relieved because she's like, wow, you really made up most of this. He said, how's your dad going to feel about it? He said, well, my dad's dead. Oh, thank God.
So you do, and you do, it's interesting actually you say that you're a dramatist because you've written novels. In fact, they're almost like bookends to your 2 novels as bookends to all the plays in between. And you write filmography, and you write various newspaper and magazine articles. You have this role as the president of Penn now. So, but you.
I think when I say I'm a dramatist, I mean it in a specific way. So if I could just explain.
Okay.
No, when I say I'm a dramatist, I'm interested in a certain kind of story, irrespective of the genre, whether it's film or theater or novels, and I'll describe what I mean by that. As a dramatist, I'm interested in reversals. That is to say, a full reversal where a character who was poor becomes rich, or a king becomes a pauper. That movement across the opposition is a hallmark of drama. And the stronger that opposition, the greater the distance that it follows, the stronger the story. But that's specific to dramatic storytelling. That's what I mean when I say I'm a dramatist.
But have you not said that drama is your favorite medium of expression? Is it, or is it not? And is there something else you're looking from having a live? I mean, if there's a symphony, for example, there is the cadence and the rhythm and the melody. The audience sort of the hearts start beating as one. You're not trying to do something like that with your drama. Is that you have, because when people leave a theater, they're leaving the theater with all kinds of different reactions to whatever you've presented. So are you trying to achieve something also with your drama? And to me, it seems, certainly with the plays that I have read, that there was also a sort of message there, but you tell us.
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think that when I write, I want to absorb the reader or the audience in the experience of the work. And when you're doing that as a theater artist, you have an audience, a living audience in front of you that either is or is not absorbed in the experience that you are presenting to them. Mm-hmm. And so the premium on making sure that the work is working, and one of the things I love about being a playwright, especially when I get a chance to work on Broadway, is that you get 3.5 weeks of previews before the show opens, which means you get to sit with the audience for 3.5 weeks every night and watch the show that the audience is experiencing and make changes during the day so that the next night it can be different. And I rewrite and rework. I mean, Andre Bishop, who's the artistic director of Lincoln Center, where I premiered all of my plays, has once told me, he said, I've never seen a playwright rewrite so much of his work as you do during previews. Because for me, the audience response, the call and response is so essential to the experience of creating drama. And what's different about writing a novel is, of course, you don't have that. You don't have that living response. But I, as a dramatist, again, working mostly in the theatrical form, am very, very attuned to wanting to create a flow, an absorbing flow that transports the reader in a way that a good play or a good movie or something like that would.
Some of your plays, for example, I think, have been followed by the group not being allowed to leave the theater, being asked to stay and actually discuss their reactions to your...
That's not my...
I
don't like that.
Oh, you don't like it?
No,
okay.
But the theaters feel they have to do it now because some of my work, goes into some tricky territory.
Right.
And so they feel that if they... there was actually, when Disgraced was being produced around the country, there were a group of scholars who sent out warning letters to theaters saying that you don't realize the work that you've programmed is a very dangerous work. And if you don't produce it responsibly, you could have some really negative ramifications. And it was interesting because so many of those theaters had decided to program the work because they thought it was some kind of like diversity outreach. And then to get a letter from the so-called diverse community telling them, wow, you better deal with this responsibly because we don't accept this bullshit that this guy's doing. So, it was complicated. So then what ended up happening is that throughout that year, the play would get produced and then there would be a lengthy Q&A afterwards where the actors had to either apologize for the play or the audience had to it was complicated. And look, my feeling about producing my work is do whatever you want. If you want to do a Q&A afterwards, fine. If you want to cast it with dogs, great. I don't care. Because my example, the writer who I admire the most and the one who I read every day is Shakespeare. And Shakespeare gets a lot of mileage out of his work, people doing it any which way that they want. So, as far as I'm concerned, if it's good enough for Shakespeare, it's good enough for me.
In other words, you don't see that as an opportunity to sort of push any agenda you might have as president of Penn or as a way of thinking about things or creating a space in which we're having a conversation about what it is to be an American today. So that's not
no, because I don't think, personally, this is my personal feeling, and I really do have to separate my role as president of Penn from my identity and my practice as an artist, because they don't overlap. And I don't think of art simply as an instance of public speech. And I don't think that artists are ultimately about trying to make communities look good or feel better. I think that's advertising and public relations. I think it speaks to the nature of the environment that we are now in, that art has been reduced to that. Because to me, the great experiences of my life are artistic, and they don't have to do with that. They are about absorption in a different order of experience and a connection to a more expansive consciousness, which is not about recognizing that Muslims are people too, or that Hindus are people too. That's dogma on some level, however true. But So for me, to follow the play with a discussion which does not leave the audience with the discomfort that the play is intended to leave the audience with, is in a sense undermining the very purpose of doing the play. But that's not the country or the world that we're living in today. Discomfort is something that is being technologically changed in us, our capacity for discomfort. And I worry about that.
With apologies now, I have an NPR question. Pure curiosity, are you psychic too? Have your dreams ever predicted the future?
So some of the stuff in the book is true. I did have a dream 2 days before 9/11 that there was this horrific attack in the center of the city. And I also did have, and it was reported in the New Yorker, that I did have a dream that was announcing the coming of a malign fog that was going to engulf the world and from which there was no escape. And that was a few weeks before the pandemic. So I think that maybe a lot of people have those kinds of experiences. I think, since my early 20s, I've kept, for 4 years in my 20s, I kept religious record of my dreams. I slept with a pencil tied to my finger, and I would wake up every 45 minutes and write down the dream I had. So I was recording 8 or 9 dreams a night, and then I would try to work through using various psychoanalytic modalities of trying to understand dream language. I spent a great deal of time doing that, and it was very instructive and helpful. And one of the things that it sort of made very clear to me is that whatever we take for space-time isn't really true. That there is some mystery beyond, this level of awareness that we live in, this bodily level of awareness, and that somehow in sleep there is easier access to something that seems to not hew to the constraints of space-time as we understand it. Because I would have dreams, I remember very vividly, actually one time, I was living in Italy and I had a dream about a Japanese woman, very vivid dream about a Japanese woman. And I was perplexed because I didn't understand. And then 3 days later, I met this person. So, and I'd never met them, and there was no way for me to know. And
when you met this person, she looked like the person.
It was the person that I saw in the dream was the person that I met. So, it's who knows what it means. I mean, I didn't end up having more than a conversation with her. It wasn't like she was a part of my life or that she was it was just some kind of rupture of the daily frame of reference. And that in that other frame of reference, there is some kind of simultaneity of content, human content, that we don't fully understand. Now, I do think that art is one of the ways that we can begin to experience that other frame of reference in this frame of reference. We can experience the expansiveness of that other frame here. I wouldn't say that I'm psychic. I would say that I have had experiences that have caused me to question the nature of space and time.
From Mr. Akhtar, we're going to move on to Ayad. And but there was so much, as I was reading the book, there was so much coming at me as a South Asian, as a woman, as an economist. I felt that I really needed to structure this conversation into categories, sort of have a taxonomy of questions. And so, forgive me, but we're going to be not very complex. So the first set of questions is about immigration and identity. The question of identity and race is the history of America. And, there have been Poles and Blacks and Jews and Italians. They have struggled with racism, ethnicism, and maybe there is something in our society that makes it so. But Ayad seems consumed by it. It defines him, he carries it with him everywhere, even into his dreams, and it's a burden that he never quite gets relief from. And even his relationships with women seem to be determined by this black cloud that's in his brain and his soul and his heart. And as he's having this having sex with Julia, he thinks, no purchase on her white flesh was enough to satisfy me. I wanted to own it. I wanted to destroy it. And after he confesses to Asha his love for her, she says to him, I don't think it's me you love. I think it's some idea you have. I felt very sad for Ayad, but sometimes I just wanted to shake him and say, Dunya mein aur bhi gum hai Islam ke siwa. And I wanted to say to Ayad, you're an educated young man. Why are you, an American, a citizen of the most polluting nation in the world, not worrying about the fact that Pakistanis are 15 times more likely to die from the climate crisis? Okay, Julia is white, but she's also a woman. So help us understand Ayad a bit. Did he really feel like destroying Julia?
Wow.
And what did Asha mean? What did Asha mean by that?
Well, believe it or not, I'm not the sort of kiss and tell type of guy.
This is Ayad.
I appreciate you shaking. You're shaking me up.
Yes, Ayad the character.
I think, one of the revelations that the narrator has, and which tracks against an understanding, an evolving understanding that I've had of my own experience growing up here and the person that I've become, the artist that I've become, the artist in some ways that I was forced to become, is that half of the story is a story of exclusion, but the other half of the story is a story of self-exclusion. I grew up in an environment that was very anti-American. So I grew up in an environment where I thought we were better. And I grew up thinking that...
In spite of your father.
But you know what? But in a weird way, my dad didn't think... my dad would say about white people, they're lazy. They don't know how to work. They're more interested in their skiing vacations and he would give the vacation. He ran this program, this very, very prestigious cardiology training program, one of the most prestigious in the world. And he'd get people from all over the world who were coming to be fellows and whatnot. And he said, I give them vacation. If they take it, I don't ask them back. And who takes it? All the white people take it. So, there was even though my father loved the country, there was this sense that we were better. I'm just that answering your question. So, the legacy of having to deal with that while being treated by the society as if you're worse is an interesting paradox. And I didn't want to resolve the paradox by saying, this society is right about me. I liked the feeling that it gave me to feel that I was better. There was something that it enabled in my psyche, if you will. And the ability to navigate that contradiction, because of course both things are false, but the ability to exist inside that contradiction and to benefit from whatever can be taken from both sides is really the journey of the book. Has that manifested itself in my personal relationships with the fairer sex? Yeah.
No, I never want to go there. Maybe the audience does.
You did go there, and I'm not going there. But what I am saying is that
this was Ayad the character.
I think just in the interest of sort of having a real conversation with all of these extraordinary people who have shown up today, I think that we can probably all identify in different ways that you can't compartmentalize certain fundamental psychological milestones or obstacles and say, well, I experience it here, but I don't experience it there. It's something that I have experienced throughout my entire life.
But in spite of everything, Ayad still refers often in the book to my country, our country, referring to America, of course, and he doesn't want to be anywhere else, quotes. But it seems to be a grudging acceptance of an accident of birth. A cloud of exile seems to hang over his continued existence in the US. And it is not the joyous, celebratory Richmond. I hear America singing the various carols I hear. Does Ayad hear any carols? What are they? And if your mistress won't have you, exactly how much credit should you get for staying with your wife?
I think the Whitman thing is interesting to talk about briefly, just because, there is such an extraordinary exuberance in Whitman that is a vision of what America can be. And, well after he wrote Song of Myself and Leaves of Grass, late in his career wrote something called Democratic Vistas, where he was much less sanguine about America, and saw a country that was far more like the country that we are living in today than the one that he writes about in Leaves of Grass. But if there is a carol, if you will, in the book, or a kind of embrace of a lyric or rhapsodic mode of experience tied to America, it's the American language. And the celebration of the American language that is the book. I got some grief from my editor, not much, but a little bit of grief from my editor about some of the language, which is so baroque at times. And it's very, very developed. People are having to look up words on every page. And I said, well, look, this language is extraordinary. People don't use it anymore. There's such richness to the American language, such immediacy, such power. So I think that the book's celebration of America is the language that makes it possible.
I'm going to just use the time to ask one more question, because I think we want you to engage with the audience. And that's compelling to me, because as an economist, but like Ayad's parents, people come from the world over to America. They seek the conditions and the opportunity that will allow them to live the lives that they have reason to value. And these are doctors, scientists, engineers, gays, women, refugees of all kinds, political exiles, artists, poets, but they are coming into a capitalist system, and we find that many of them gravitating towards opportunities that maybe maximize their wealth, in the process compromising values they grew up with. And Ayad's Muslim milieu often complains about the empty heart at the center of American life. What do you think happens? Does Ayad think there's a white Protestant virus of acquisitiveness, birthed by a Presbyterian James Watt, that has found conditions in America to thrive in? Or is it just the financial sector and Silicon Valley? Or is it cultural, driven by TV and media, reality shows about the rich and the famous, and that anyone can be a millionaire, well, hey, even a billionaire? So what do you think?
Well, to Tocqueville in Democracy in America, thank you for that question, by the way, sort of identifies as an outsider observing the American experience the two things that Americans have passion for. One is equality and the other is making money. So I think that it's a long story, the story of making money in American life. I wanted to write a book that, my parents came to this country as my mother was dying. She complained yet again about my parents' second date. Apparently, it was 1968, they both had kind of rejected arranged marriages. They'd met in medical school. My father had been dogged in his pursuit of her. She finally deigned to go out on a date with him. And I think she was smitten after the first date. He was a very charming guy, first in his class, and he was teaching. She was a year behind, so he was her teaching assistant in the class, the supervising teaching assistant. And then they had a decision, we may get together for a second date. And my father didn't show up. So he stood her up. So 50 years later, 2 weeks before she's dying, she's still complaining about this second date. The parallels with Seinfeld are clear. So finally, it's like, I've heard this story and I never really paid attention. It was really irritating most of my life, but now I really would like to know what happened. So I kind of looked over at my dad, who was in the kitchen. I was like, Dad, why didn't you just show up for her second date? For your second date? Like, that's kind of fucked up. Yeah? That was the night they shot Bobby Kennedy. How could I go on a date? My mother screaming from the couch, what does Bobby Kennedy have to do with a second date? As if they had never had this conversation. And my dad, who, is probably 14 vodkas in at that point in the day. He said, don't you understand, Rashid? They give hope. But it was that they didn't give hope. So there was an idea of America as a place of hope. That was what drew, and then of course the atmosphere of that idea had to do with prosperity, of course. It had to do with a kind of abundance, right? Mm-hmm. But it was tied, it was rich and good. That it was the best of what you could imagine, the best of what you could live. And that was a country where a few years earlier, Bobby Kennedy's brother, John F. Kennedy, asked us all as Americans not to think of what the country could do for us, but what we could do for the country. How in 50 years had we become a country where the dominant political question was, what has my country not done for me? What an extraordinary movement. And how it tracked such a change in sentiment, but also a change in American life, and a change in American hope, and a change in what America meant for the rest of the world. My parents came to one country, they died in another. I was born and lived the life that I've lived to this point in between. So whatever we experienced, that is us, the children of that generation, and what that generation went through here, probably told the story of what happened to America. That was the story that I was trying to tell. Do I think that was there some meaningful idea of restraint within the Protestant capitalist order of an earlier time in American life? Maybe not, but there was a meaningful collective pushback against it that began in the Great Depression. And there was a meaningful attempt to define a collective we from the point of view of policy that was a meaningful check against the interests of big business. We are now 40 years into the dismantling, wholesale dismantling of any idea of a collective good or collective we that we are all accountable to. Mm-hmm. And I think that the crumbling of our republic, because make no mistake, that is exactly what is happening. And it is happening in a way very similar to the way that it happened in the late Roman Empire. Mm-hmm. Almost beat for beat. And it's about economics at the end of the day.
After the fatwa against Salman Rushdie, he kept protesting that he was not a Muslim. So that could be seen as apostasy. Ayad, I don't see of the faith, but I don't see him either as not of the faith. So does Ayad ever worry about consequences?
No. It's not my job. My job is to write what I have to write, and then if I have to suffer the consequences, then I suffer the consequences.
Invite questions from the audience.
Though we don't know you, thank you for being a good sport. It can't be easy being on the same stage with the Pulitzer Prize winner. And of course, Andrew. Yes.
Thank you.
And you've been a terrific sport. Anu will make you soon forget about Davies. So Anu mentioned Amartya Sen. Let's take the title of a wonderful book by him, The Argumentative Indian. A great subtitle might be what you had said earlier. Take something from both sides. You just said it a few minutes ago. And in that spirit of argumentation, what argument do you have with one or any of the following? Wisconsin as a proxy for today's America, Donald Trump, J.D. Davis, and Cat Stevens.
Wow. I have no problem with Cat Stevens. I don't think he's called Cat Stevens anymore. Use of Islam. I don't listen to the music he makes. I don't know if he would consider that an argument. Donald Trump, to me, is the spiritual muse of Homeland Elegies. He is also a symptom of our problems and a symptom of what we have become. And it's something that I go into great length in Homeland Elegies. I won't repeat it here. I don't see Donald Trump as the problem, but he is a symptom that has become a problem, as untreated abscess often can. the abscess is caused by an underlying disease, but the abscess can then itself cause a fatal illness. What were the other two?
Oh, Hillbilly Elegies.
You know, I don't really have any. I have love for Wisconsin. I mean, what's happened in Wisconsin is unfortunate. I grew up in a state that never made me feel other. It never really made. I grew up feeling very, very accepted. People didn't know where the hell we were from. What's Pakistan? Is that near Jamaica? Do they have pumpkins there? You know, but there was a real open-hearted sort of welcome I felt growing up, and I loved growing up in Wisconsin, and I still do love Wisconsin, though I do recognize that it has become a kind of, and it always has been a test politically for what happens in American life. And I think that the devolution of the sort of the dissolution of political civility in Wisconsin, which I've experienced firsthand, as the book demonstrates, is a great shock to me and a great sadness. I do recognize the truth of the struggle between the rural regions and the urban centers and the heartland and the coast. Antitrust regulation in this country has led to the despoiling of the heartlands for the benefit of increasingly fewer and fewer companies along the coast and in the urban centers. And the impoverishment of the rural regions and the impoverishment of the heartland at the expense of the coast is the great American story that is creating most of the deep, deep dissensions that we have. Until we really recognize that we don't even stand a chance to deal with the problem. And I don't remember what the last one was. Oh yeah, J.D. Vance. Yeah, no, I mean, he seems like kind of a hypocrite to me. But
I heard a question in the introduction about you. Somebody mentioned that you are going into an inward journey looking for God within. If that's where you are heading, my question to you is that do you see yourself in future perhaps playing a role in creating a better narrative about Allah's Islam versus Mullah's Islam, and really just bring just really getting that heart element out into the open and bringing back this is extremely important. I mean, right now you just see that as Shia versus Sunni or something like that, but somebody like yourself could actually play a role in bringing out that heart element of what it really was and what it really is.
yeah.
So,
I appreciate that question so much, and I'm very moved that you would ask me that. Maybe, I think that what I worry about is that I have so much baggage with my tradition, and so much that I am trying to work through, that I wouldn't want to promulgate some fantasy of a relationship that I don't have. I do think that there is, of course, profound wisdom. I read Ibn Arabi regularly, and I find Ibn Arabi, of course, as he is, to be one of the great spiritual geniuses of humanity. And there is a way, and there is a doorway to exactly what you're talking about. But I think that right now, where we are as an ummah, we've got some issues that need to be dealt with. And I don't want to pretend for white people or for Hindus that we don't have problems, because we do. And I think first and foremost, one of our problems has to do with our relationship with our own history. And maybe that's true of other people too, but that's not my problem. I have to stay focused on what I understand. So, but I thank you for that question. Thank you.
So we've had so many people on this stage, and I can't say how honored we are that you are here, really and truly. And I have a question. I saw Disgraced in Chicago and Junk on Broadway, and I'm wondering, I'm hoping that you will continue to write plays. Are you planning to continue to write plays, or are you going to sort of go into movies and television on other things? Because I love the plays.
Yeah, I do too. Thank you for saying that. I hope to write more plays. I am writing 2 TV shows right now. I'm writing a show for HBO about Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg. And I know where I am right now. I didn't say that without being aware of that. And then I'm also doing an adaptation of Homeland Elegies for Showtime. So those are the 2 things that are taking up my time, but I'm looking forward to writing more plays.
It's a joy having you here.
Thank you. Thank you.
She runs Filament Club for all of us. Thank you, Angela. That's why she was the only one allowed to ask the last question. Ayad, thank you so much.
Thank you, Anu.
It's just been wonderful to have you here with all the brain food that has happened. I have to absorb a lot of stuff right now. Anu, honestly, thank you for asking all the right questions and also getting just provoking Ayad just that teeny bit. Thank you.